I found a GPS tracking device attached underneath my pickup during a routine Saturday morning maintenance check, something I'd been doing faithfully for over 4 decades. The installation was remarkably professional. Clean wiring, proper connections, and a heavy-duty magnet securing it firmly to the frame. What disturbed me most was that the device felt warm, not from the mild October sunshine in rural Colorado, where temperatures hovered around 60 degrees, but from active use. Someone had placed it there recently, possibly that same morning. At 72 years old, living a quiet retirement on my small ranch with just a few horses, some chickens, and the vast Colorado sky above me, I couldn't understand why anyone would need to monitor my whereabouts. Life had become pleasantly routine after leaving my career as a structural engineer. Mondays meant feeding animals at sunrise, checking water systems, and inspecting fence lines. Tuesdays I'd drive to town for supplies, always the same route along Route 285, always stopping at Anderson's General Store where Carol at the register knew exactly what I needed. The rest of my week followed similar patterns of maintenance, reading, and meal preparation. My schedule hadn't contained surprises in years, exactly how I preferred it. The realization hit me hard. Someone wanted precise information about my location, timing, and duration of every trip. The question bothered me deeply. Who benefits from tracking an elderly man's predictable routine? Who needs real-time updates on hardware store visits or veterinary appointments? Determined to discover the truth without alerting whoever was responsible, I chose a methodical approach. I carefully removed the tracker, cleaned it thoroughly, sealed it in a plastic bag, and anonymously mailed it to an old colleague in Seattle, Washington. I told nobody, not my neighbor Robert, not the postal worker who handled the package, and definitely not my son Derek. I simply observed and waited. Within 12 hours, Derek's phone started ringing constantly. I watched through the kitchen window as his expression changed dramatically, his posture sagging under whatever news he was receiving. In that revealing moment, everything became clear. I knew precisely who had placed the tracker on my truck. The Saturday maintenance routine had always been my personal tradition. Every weekend, without exception, I'd slide under my Silverado, drain the old oil, replace the filter, and add fresh synthetic oil. The truck was a 2010 model, midnight blue with 192,000 miles showing, running as smoothly as when I first bought it. I'd replaced various parts over the years, alternator, water pump, multiple tire sets, but the engine remained reliable. My joints protested more each year, my back complained louder, but I still valued this work. It represented one of the few activities I could still perform entirely independently, a small declaration of self-reliance in a world that seemed to contract gradually. My late wife Patricia used to bring me coffee during these sessions, standing in the garage entrance with steam rising from the mug, asking about my progress even though she'd heard the explanations countless times. She'd been gone 4 years now, taken by aggressive cancer that progressed faster than anyone anticipated. The garage felt emptier without her, the silence more profound. But the ritual continued, my method of maintaining connection to a life that once felt complete and meaningful. That particular morning, while reaching up to secure the drain plug, my fingers encountered something unexpected. Smooth, rectangular, distinctly metallic. I paused, pulse quickening, then explored more carefully. There it was, a black device roughly the size of a playing card deck, magnetically mounted to the frame. I rolled out, retrieved my flashlight, and examined it more closely. The beam revealed a small red indicator light blinking steadily. Professional installation, quality components. This wasn't some cheap consumer-grade tracker available online for minimal cost. Having worked 4 decades as a structural engineer before retirement, I immediately recognized quality equipment. This device cost several $100s, possibly more. And it was warm from active power and data transmission, not from engine heat or ambient temperature. Someone had installed it within recent hours. Rather than removing it impulsively, I followed what years of professional problem-solving had taught me. Document everything first. I took numerous photographs, close-ups of serial numbers, wide shots showing exact mounting location, multiple angles of the wiring. I photographed the indicator light, mounting hardware, installation precision. Then I carefully cleaned the device, removed it with a soft magnetic click, wrapped it securely and brought it inside, leaving the maintenance work unfinished. At my kitchen table I studied the black device through clear plastic. GPS tracker certainly, but why? Who would invest such effort monitoring a 72-year-old man who rarely left his ranch except for supplies, occasional medical appointments, or feed store trips? My assets weren't particularly impressive. The ranch was fully paid, worth perhaps $450,000 in current market conditions, and I received a modest pension from my engineering career, depositing $3,000 monthly into my checking account. Comfortable, but hardly wealthy. My truck was aging, my clothing functional, and my biggest luxury was reliable internet service enabling weekly video calls with my granddaughter Sophie. I mentally reviewed recent weeks, searching for anything unusual. Only 3 people had accessed my garage. My neighbor Robert, 77 and still struggling with basic smartphone functions, the propane delivery technician who serviced my tank earlier that week, and my son Derek, who'd stopped by supposedly to check on the horses. Robert couldn't have done it. He barely managed text messages, and I'd known him 25 years, since he and his wife Linda moved next door. The delivery technician was a stranger with no apparent motive, a young man who spent his entire visit focused on his phone. That left Derek. Derek had spent approximately 15 minutes alone in the garage, claiming he was inspecting tire pressure to ensure the old man's vehicle was safe. Yet in 37 years, Derek had never shown interest in the horses, and checking tire pressure doesn't require 15 minutes. My analytical mind began assembling the puzzle. The device's warmth indicated active transmission. Someone was monitoring my location in real time. Someone possessing technical skill and expensive equipment to do it properly. I pulled up Derek's contact on my phone, thumb hovering over the call button, but stopped myself. 4 decades of solving engineering problems had taught me one fundamental rule: never draw conclusions without data. Test your hypothesis first. Observe the system under controlled conditions. See what breaks when you apply pressure. I placed the sealed bag in my kitchen drawer and closed it. The truck would remain stationary. I wouldn't drive anywhere temporarily. If someone was tracking me, they were about to become very confused about my sudden immobility. 3 people had garage access, but only one possessed sufficient mechanical knowledge to install a tracker so professionally. My own son. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. Instead, I waited, just as I'd waited for lab results throughout my career. Sunday passed quietly, feeding horses, mending fence sections, cleaning the barn, enjoying crisp autumn air. I walked my property perimeter, checking for other anomalies. The horses seemed calm, chickens contentedly scratched in their enclosure. Everything appeared normal superficially, yet underneath I sensed building tension. The Silverado sat untouched. The tracker remained silent in my drawer. Monday I stayed near the house, repaired deteriorating porch railings, organized the tool storage, and prepared a large pot of chili for the week. Still no driving necessary. I maintained my daily routines with deliberate precision, preserving the appearance of normalcy while mentally working through scenarios and possibilities. At 2 p.m, my phone buzzed. Derek. His voice sounded overly casual, the forced nonchalance people employ when trying too hard to sound normal. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How's everything?" Then, almost immediately, "Your truck running okay?" There it was, not, "How are you feeling?" but, "Your truck running okay?" I told him I was experiencing transmission problems and planned keeping it stationary temporarily. His tone shifted immediately, voice tightening. "What's wrong exactly? Where are you taking it? How long will repairs take?" 3 questions in 5 seconds. That wasn't concern, that was barely controlled panic. I kept my voice steady and said I'd handle it eventually. When I asked why he was suddenly so interested in my truck, silence stretched across the line. Finally, he muttered something about wanting to ensure I was safe at my age. I reminded him I was 72, not incapacitated, and ended the call. He hadn't called checking on me, he'd called checking on the truck. Tuesday morning, while working in the garden, the phone rang again. Derek sounded breathless. "Dad, hey, I was thinking maybe I could visit this weekend." When I mentioned the truck remained inoperable, he pressed harder. "You're certain it's just transmission? Nothing else wrong with it?" The question was too specific, too pointed. I told him everything was fine and disconnected. 2 calls in 3 days. Derek usually called once monthly at most, and both times he'd asked about the truck, never about me or the ranch. I opened the drawer and examined the tracker. Its indicator still blinked, patient and persistent. My analytical mind connected more dots. 8 months earlier, Derek had insisted on personally configuring my new internet router. 4 months ago, he'd spent considerable time alone fixing my slow computer. This wasn't a single incident. It was a pattern. He hadn't been helping me. He'd been preparing for something. The tracker wasn't about my safety. If it were, he wouldn't have panicked when I stayed home. This was about control, knowing exactly where I was constantly. That Tuesday night, I sat in the darkened living room thinking about my son, the boy who once stood beside me in this very garage, learning vehicle maintenance and mechanical principles, had become a man I no longer recognized. I remembered teaching him to drive on these same dirt roads, his nervous hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, while I calmly instructed him to relax, to feel the road. I remembered watching him graduate high school with academic honors, helping him through his first apartment lease when he moved to Denver for college, lending him money for his wedding to Michelle 7 years ago. We'd been close once, or so I'd believed, but something had changed over recent years. The phone calls became less frequent, his visits shorter and more perfunctory. He'd lost weight, developed dark circles under his eyes, and always seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly like he was awaiting urgent news. Michelle had changed too, more demanding, more materialistic, constantly discussing houses they couldn't afford and vacations they couldn't take. Last Thanksgiving, when they visited for dinner, Derek had spent most of the meal scrolling through his phone while Michelle complained about their outdated kitchen and how all her friends were renovating their homes. They'd left early, claiming they had another engagement. Where had that boy gone? If Derek was desperate enough to track my movements, there had to be a reason, something that made him willing to deceive his own father. I needed to know how far he would go. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. James Mitchell, a long-haul trucker, an old friend who never asked unnecessary questions. I told him I needed a favor. He agreed without hesitation. 20 minutes later, I met him at the truck stop just outside Colorado Springs. The Colorado morning was cold, fog clinging to the pavement. His big rig idled like distant thunder. I handed him a small package containing the tracker, wrapped in bubble wrap and sealed with tape. No return address, no identifying information. James looked at me for a long moment, his weathered face telling me he understood this wasn't a simple favor. Then he tucked the package behind his seat. "I'll text when I cross into Oregon," he said. His truck pulled away west, red tail lights disappearing into the fog. I watched until they vanished, then drove home. The waiting was extremely difficult. I fed the horses, checked fence lines, prepared a sandwich I barely touched, and kept my phone volume maximized. Every minute felt interminable. My mind kept circling back to worst-case scenarios. What if Derek was involved with drugs? What if he'd gotten mixed up with organized crime? What if someone was threatening him, forcing him to spy on me? I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that would make sense once we talked. But the professional installation of that tracker, the expensive equipment, the careful concealment, none of that suggested innocent intentions. I walked through the house room by room, looking at family photographs on the walls. Derek at age 6 missing his front teeth, holding up a fish he'd caught in the creek. Derek at 13, proudly standing next to the treehouse we'd built together. Derek at 19, in his graduation cap and gown, his whole future spread out before him. Patricia stood beside him in that photo, her arm around his shoulders, both of them beaming at the camera. What would she think if she could see us now? Would she understand what I was about to do? Would she forgive me for what might come next? At 8 that evening, Derek called again, too cheerful, too forced. "Hey, Dad, how's it going? You home?" I confirmed I was, that the truck remained inoperable. His voice was stretched thin, like wire about to snap. Later at 9:30, the phone rang again. "Dad, where are you?" No greeting, just a demand laced with panic. In the background, I heard Michelle's sharp voice demanding the phone. Derek whispered that we needed to talk in person tomorrow morning, that I should stay home tonight. I told him I was 72 years old and had nowhere to go. After I disconnected, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Derek hadn't asked if I was okay. He had asked where I was. He was watching his tracking application right now, seeing my truck making an impossible journey 1,500 miles west toward the Pacific coast. He had lost my location, and he was terrified. Good. Let him worry. That night I couldn't sleep. Something Derek had said kept echoing. "Are you certain you're at the ranch?" How would he know if I wasn't? The tracker was traveling to Oregon. Unless there was another method, he'd been monitoring me. At 1 in the morning, I walked to my office and opened my laptop. Derek had configured the internet 8 months ago and serviced it several times when it ran slow. I opened Task Manager and scanned running processes. One stood out, a remote access service I didn't recognize. On my phone, I searched the name. My hands began trembling. It was remote desktop software. Someone could view my screen, access my files, and control the computer from anywhere. It had been installed the exact day Derek helped with the internet. Digging deeper into file access logs, I found bank statements, legal documents, emails, and the property deed, all accessed remotely when I wasn't home. I left the spyware in place so he wouldn't know I had discovered it. Tracker plus spyware, location, and finances. Why would my son need both? At 2 a.m., I walked to neighbor Robert's house and quietly asked to use his computer. He let me in without question, concern evident on his elderly face. I searched the remote access software, illegal under federal law up to 10 years imprisonment. Then I looked up the tracker's model number from my photographs. The manufacturer's website described it as an advanced vehicle monitoring system with remote engine shutoff and brake override capabilities. I watched demonstration videos of test vehicles at highway speed suddenly losing power, brakes locking, spinning out of control. On a real highway, the driver would almost certainly die. My son hadn't just been tracking me. He had installed a kill switch on my truck. He could end my life with a single button press on his phone. Thursday morning at 6, I made 2 calls, one to Andrew Harrison, the attorney who handled Patricia's estate, and one to Carl at the auto repair shop. By noon, I would know whether I was paranoid or whether my son was truly attempting to kill me. Andrew's office was in downtown Colorado Springs, on the 4th floor of a historic building that smelled of old wood and leather-bound books. The elevator creaked as it climbed, a sound matching how I felt inside. Old, tired, struggling upward against gravity and time. I arrived at 9 with a USB drive containing screenshots from Robert's computer and photographs of the tracker. Andrew was 64, a sharp-minded attorney with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose. He'd handled Patricia's estate with compassion and efficiency, never rushing me through decisions, never making me feel like just another billable hour. I trusted him completely. He connected the USB drive, clicked through files, and his expression darkened with each image. "This is surveillance without consent, potentially a felony," he said, his voice low and serious. "Thomas, who installed this on your truck?" I couldn't say the words aloud yet. Instead, I told him the rest. I suspected someone had attempted to file a power of attorney in my name. Andrew's expression shifted from concern to alarm. He turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed Colorado state records. 5 minutes later, he looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, genuine fear. "Thomas, "Sit down." I was already sitting. 3 weeks earlier, someone had submitted a durable power of attorney with a forged signature. The notary had flagged it, but if Andrew hadn't caught it, Derek would have gained legal control over my ranch, my pension, my medical decisions, everything. 5 days ago, someone had used my ranch as collateral for a $350,000 loan from a questionable investment firm, loan sharks disguised as a legitimate business. Derek owed them money, and if he didn't pay, they would collect violently. Andrew showed me the paperwork, the forged signature that looked almost like mine but had telltale differences in the loops and pressure points. Carl at the auto shop confirmed what I feared. The tracker was a full kill switch device, capable of remotely cutting fuel, disabling the engine, and locking the brakes at any speed. "Highway speed. You're dead," he said flat. Friday morning, I drove to Denver and purchased 4 hidden security cameras and a new laptop that nobody else could access. I installed the cameras throughout the house: living room, kitchen, porch, office, streaming exclusively to the new laptop. Each camera was positioned to capture clear facial recognition and audio. I called the FBI Denver field office and spoke with Agent Maria Sanchez. I told her everything: the tracker, the spyware, the forged documents, the loan, the timeline. I arranged for agents to be concealed at my ranch the next morning. I called Derek and told him to come at 9 a.m. Saturday, just the two of us. That night I practiced my questions in the mirror, gentle initially, then firmer until the truth had nowhere left to hide. At 8:50 a.m. Saturday, I heard Derek's truck on the gravel. I checked the cameras one last time. Agent Sanchez and David Thompson were already positioned, hidden in the barn and tool shed. Derek knocked 3 times, softly, hesitantly. Michelle stood beside him uninvited. I opened the door and let them in. They sat on the sofa. I took the chair across from them. I calmly presented what I knew: the tracker, the spyware, the forged power of attorney, the $350,000 loan. Derek broke down, admitting he had installed the tracker and accessed my computer, though he claimed he didn't know about the kill switch capability. Michelle admitted purchasing the device, insisting it was just GPS tracking. I told them everything had been recorded. Then I called the agents out of hiding. Derek and Michelle were arrested for wire fraud, attempted murder, elder abuse, and identity theft. They were led away in handcuffs, Derek sobbing and looking back at me through the car window. 6 months later, Derek was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, Michelle to 6 years plus substantial fines. The FBI raided the loan shark operation, shutting down their entire network and arresting 19 people across 4 states. Agents discovered that the organization had been targeting elderly property owners throughout Colorado and Wyoming, using their children and grandchildren as unwitting accomplices by offering them loans with impossible terms, then demanding collateral they knew the borrowers couldn't provide. Derek had been one of dozens caught in their trap. My ranch was placed in an irrevocable trust, protected from further schemes, with specific instructions that it would pass to my granddaughter Sophie when she turned 25. I adopted a border collie puppy named Max from the shelter in Colorado Springs, and he quickly became my constant companion, following me everywhere around the property, sleeping at the foot of my bed, alert to every sound and movement. Having Max made the house feel less empty, gave me someone to talk to during long Colorado winters. I joined an elder abuse support group that met twice monthly at the community center in town, sharing my story to help others recognize warning signs. The group was led by a social worker named Jennifer, a dedicated woman in her 50s, who had spent her career protecting vulnerable seniors. Through the group, I met others who had experienced similar betrayals: a woman whose daughter had stolen her identity to open credit cards, a man whose son had convinced him to sign over his house while claiming it was just insurance paperwork, a widow whose nephew had systematically emptied her bank accounts over 2 years. Their stories made me realize I wasn't alone, that this kind of family betrayal was more common than anyone wanted to admit. I still receive letters from Derek. They arrive every 2 weeks, handwritten on prison stationery, always apologetic, always claiming he's changed. In his latest letter, Derek said he understands what he did and that turning him in saved his life. I haven't forgiven him yet, but I kept the letter. Some wounds never heal completely. Looking back, the lessons came too late. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Document everything: photographs, screenshots, dates. Protect yourself first. Self-preservation isn't selfish when someone is trying to harm you. Blood may be thicker than water, but survival is thicker than blood. I'm still here, on my ranch, with my dog, living my life on my terms, free. Share this story with your loved ones. It might just save a life. Subscribe so you never miss the real-life stories that truly matter. Your support allows these important messages to reach the people who need them most. Thank you for listening.